A man sat at the edge of his private lake, his fishing rod resting in his hands, the line disappearing into the calm surface of the water. The early morning was quiet, the kind of silence that felt almost sacred. Mist floated above the lake, drifting slowly like smoke, and the air was cool, fresh, carrying the soft sounds of birds hidden in the trees. He loved this place. It was his escape, a private corner of the world where no one bothered him, where time felt like it slowed down. Every ripple on the lake made him feel alive, every tug on the line gave him hope of a catch. He leaned back on the wooden chair he had brought, letting the soft rays of the sun warm his face. His thoughts were calm, his mind at peace. He believed that this day would be just like any other, slow and quiet, filled with fishing and reflection. But life had a way of breaking peace without warning. From the dirt road that curved along the edge of the lake, two figures appeared. They walked slowly, talking to each other in low voices. The man noticed them and frowned. They were not strangers. They were HOA board members, people from the subdivision nearby. He had seen them before, always dressed in neat clothes, always acting like they owned everything they saw. He never paid much attention to them. But today was different. They stopped near the lake, not too far from where he sat. Their eyes fixed on him. They did not wave, did not greet. Instead they leaned toward each other and whispered, their eyes narrow, their faces sharp with judgment. The man shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. He had done nothing wrong. This was his property, his lake. His family had owned it long before the subdivision was even built. Why were they watching him like a criminal? The woman raised her phone and snapped a picture. The sound of the click echoed across the water. The man's grip tightened on his rod. He looked away, trying to ignore them. But then the man beside her also raised a phone, dialing someone. His lips moved quickly, and the man by the lake caught a few words carried by the breeze, words that froze him. Trespassing, down by the lake, send someone quick. The man blinked, his heart suddenly heavy. Were they calling the police, for him? For sitting by his own lake? Disbelief washed over him. He wanted to laugh, but anger boiled under the surface. He stood and shouted across the water, his voice firm. This is my property. What are you doing? The board members looked at him, their faces smug, and one of them raised a hand as if dismissing him, then turned back to the phone call. The man felt a chill run down his spine. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act. They were accusing him, twisting the truth. His stomach tightened as he thought of what would happen next. He sat back down, forcing himself to remain calm. The birds still sang, the mist still drifted, but the peace had shattered. Every sound now felt sharp, every minute dragged. Then it came, faint at first, but growing louder, the sound of sirens. The man's eyes lifted toward the road, the red and blue lights flashing between the trees. His heart raced. His hands tightened on the rod until his knuckles turned white. The line still stretched into the water, forgotten. The hook of the story now dug deep into his chest. The police were coming, and he had no idea how this would end. He thought of the papers locked away in his home, the deeds, the maps, all the proof that the lake belonged to him. But right now none of that mattered. What mattered was that strangers were about to judge him before knowing the truth. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. The sirens grew closer. The flashing lights spilled across the dirt path, reflecting in the water. The board members stood straighter, as if proud of what they had done, as if waiting to see him dragged away. He clenched his jaw, anger and confusion mixing into something darker. He thought of the years he had spent caring for this lake, cleaning its banks, protecting its wildlife, and now here he was, treated like a thief on his own land. The sound of the squad car stopping, the crunch of gravel under tires, the slam of doors, all of it felt too loud, too real. Two officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their hands resting on their belts. One looked toward him, one toward the HOA members. The man stood slowly, his fishing rod still in hand, the line dripping with lake water. He raised his voice, steady. This is my lake, I am not trespassing. The officers did not answer at once. Instead they turned to the board members, who began talking fast, pointing at him, waving their hands like actors on a stage. He could not hear every word, but the tone was clear. They were painting him as a stranger, an intruder. His blood boiled, yet he stood still, his eyes fixed on the officers, waiting. The lake behind him shimmered in the sunlight, beautiful and calm, but inside him a storm raged. He knew this was only the beginning, that something far more dangerous was hiding under this simple act of fishing. The tension was heavy, pressing on his shoulders. The sirens now gone but their echo still in his ears. The grip on his rod was firm, almost too tight, and he realized he had no choice. He would have to fight not with fists but with truth, with proof, with patience. But in that moment as the officers stepped closer, as the HOA members whispered again and pointed fingers, he wondered if the truth would even matter, or if the world would believe the louder voice. The hook tightened as the morning that began so peacefully turned into a test he had never expected, and as the officers stopped in front of him, their faces unreadable, the man's heart pounded. His calm lake had become a battlefield, and his quiet life was no longer safe. The police officers stood tall on the gravel path, their faces unreadable as the two HOA board members waved their hands and repeated their accusations, pointing again and again at the man who still stood with his fishing rod in hand, the mist of the lake curling around his feet as if shielding him from the storm building on shore. The officers finally turned to him, their voices calm but filled with authority as they asked for his name, his identification, and the reason he was on the property. The man blinked in disbelief, a bitter laugh caught in his throat. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, showing them his driver's license, his hand steady though inside his chest thunder rolled. "This is my land," he said, his voice firm but low. "My family has owned this lake for years. I am not trespassing." The officers glanced at each other, then at the HOA members who scoffed loudly, one woman crossing her arms as if already victorious. "That's not true," she said, her tone sharp and dripping with false confidence. "This is our community lake. We've maintained it. We've kept it open for residents. He's just some guy who wandered in and thinks he can fish here." The words cut deep, and neighbors began to appear from the subdivision, drawn by the flashing lights and the noise, a crowd slowly gathering on the dirt path, whispers filling the air. The man felt the weight of their eyes on him, strangers who did not know the truth but were already judging him, already believing the loud voices of the HOA. The officers spoke again, saying that this sounded like a civil dispute, not a criminal matter, but their tone was cautious, as if they were trying to balance two sides. The man shook his head, frustration bubbling. "A civil dispute," he repeated. "They called you here saying I was trespassing. They lied, and now you want to say it's just a dispute. Do you not see what's happening? They are using you to scare me off my own land." His words carried across the crowd, and some of the neighbors shifted uneasily, but the board members only grew louder, insisting they had paperwork, insisting the subdivision had rights to the lake, insisting the man was the intruder. The man's anger simmered but he kept his voice steady. "Show your paperwork then," he challenged. "Bring it here. Let's see whose name is on the deed, because I already know the answer." His calm defiance silenced a few whispers. The officers finally asked if he had proof, and he admitted the deeds were at his home, locked in a safe, but that he could show them if needed. Still, the HOA members smirked as if they had already won. One of them leaned toward the crowd, whispering loudly enough for all to hear. "His bluffing. People like him always bluff." The man's jaw tightened, rage pressing against his calm exterior. But he knew exploding now would only prove their story, so he gripped his fishing rod tighter, letting the wood ground him, letting the weight remind him of his patience. The officers, clearly tired of the shouting, finally said they would write a report but advised the man and the HOA to resolve it through legal channels. The man nodded, knowing that at least they had not dragged him away. But as the officers left, the crowd remained, eyes burning holes into his back, whispers now poisoned with doubt. What if he really doesn't own it? Why would the HOA lie? Maybe he's just making trouble. Every word hit him like a stone. But he stood his ground until the cars pulled away, the sirens fading. Only then did he turn back to the lake, the water still calm, reflecting the morning light, but he no longer felt peace. Instead he felt watched, hunted. Every ripple seemed like a warning. He sat again, pretending to fish, but his mind raced. He thought about the path he had seen, the footprints, the trash, the signs that people had been trespassing on his land for years, and now he understood why the HOA wanted him gone. They weren't protecting the community, they were protecting their secret, the secret that they had claimed something that was never theirs, and if the truth came out, their power would crumble. He clenched his teeth and made a silent vow. They would not take this lake from him, not today, not ever. He would gather every document, every record, every piece of history that proved the truth. He would make them regret calling the police on him. And as the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving only a few curious eyes behind, The man stared at the water, the reflection of his determined face staring back, and he whispered into the mist. "You picked the wrong man to fight." That night the man could not sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every moment from the morning, the sirens, the smug faces of the HOA members, the crowd whispering as if he were the intruder on his own land. His blood boiled with every memory, and finally he sat up, knowing that rest would not come. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, slipped on his boots, and stepped outside into the cool night air. The lake shimmered under the pale moonlight, silver, ripples gliding across its surface as if whispering secrets. The man walked slowly toward the far side where he had once noticed a dirt path, his heart heavy but his steps firm. He had to see it again, had to know how deep this trespassing went. As he reached the trees, his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing crushed grass and flattened soil, marks of footsteps both old and new. He followed them, each step echoing with anger. The path wound around the lake's edge, deeper into the woods that separated his property from the subdivision, and the further he went the clearer the signs became. Candy wrappers half buried in dirt, beer cans tossed carelessly against tree trunks, even a plastic chair half broken and abandoned in the bushes. His jaw tightened. This was no mistake, no rare crossing. This was routine. These people had been using his land for years as if it belonged to them. His light fell on tire tracks pressed into the soft soil, thin lines curving down the path, bicycles, maybe even ATVs. He knelt down, touching the grooves. The dirt was fresh. It had been made just yesterday. He stood again, the rage inside him now a storm, and he moved further down the path until finally he reached the other end, the place where it opened directly into the subdivision. There in front of him stood a wooden fence, not old, not broken, but with a wide gap cut into it, wide enough for people to walk through without effort. A deliberate gap, as if the fence had been built to invite passage rather than block it. He stared at it, his chest rising and falling hard, and he thought of the board members standing so proud earlier, calling the police as if he were the one trespassing, all the while knowing their own residents had been sneaking onto his land for picnics and fishing trips. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. He raised his flashlight higher and saw something that made his stomach twist, nailed to the tree just inside his property was a small wooden sign, faded but still readable, Community Lake Access. His hands curled into fists. They had not only cut a path, they had labeled his land as theirs, marked it as part of their neighborhood. He yanked the sign off the tree and threw it to the ground, the wood cracking. His heart raced with fury, but beneath it there was fear too, fear of what this meant. If they had been doing this for years, how many people believed the lie? How many thought the lake was never his to begin with? He picked up the broken sign, tucked it under his arm, and marched back toward the lake, every step heavier than the last. By the time he reached his dock the moon was high, reflecting off the water like glass. He dropped the sign on the planks and sat on the edge, staring into the dark depths, his mind alive with questions. How far had this trespassing gone? How many times had he fished here while strangers wandered just out of sight? How many nights had families walked through that hidden path carrying food and chairs, laughing by the water while he slept unaware? The thought of it made his skin crawl. This was not just trespassing, it was theft, theft of his peace, his privacy, his property, and the HOA had allowed it, maybe even encouraged it. He sat there for a long time, his rod forgotten, the cool night air wrapping around him. Then he stood with renewed determination. He would not only expose them, he would make sure every neighbor, every officer, every official knew the truth. Tomorrow he would start. He would take photos of the path, of the tracks, of the trash, of the broken sign that dared call his lake theirs. He would gather evidence piece by piece until their lies fell apart. His heart steadied with this plan, and as the night grew quieter and the stars wheeled overhead, he whispered to himself that they had trespassed long enough. The lake was his, and soon everyone would know it. The next evening the man parked his truck a short distance away from the HOA clubhouse. The lights inside were bright against the growing darkness. Voices spilled out through the open windows, laughter mixed with the sound of chairs scraping. He knew this was their monthly board meeting, a gathering where they made decisions about the subdivision and boasted about their little rules. He had never cared before, but tonight he could not stay away. He had to see with his own eyes how deep their lies ran. He walked slowly, carrying a small folder tucked under his arm. Inside it were the photos he had taken the night before, the dirt path, the footprints, the trash, and the broken sign that claimed his lake as community property. His stomach tightened as he reached the door. For a moment he considered turning back. But then he remembered the smug faces of the board members, the sound of sirens, the whispers of neighbors calling him a trespasser, and he pushed the door open. Inside the room was crowded. Board members sat at a long table. In front, papers spread across it. Neighbors filled chairs lined in rows, some holding coffee cups, some with notepads. The president of the HOA, a tall man with a sharp jaw and an expensive watch, stood at the front, his voice carrying across the room. Our next project is the lake. As you all know, this is an important part of our community. We've already budgeted for benches and maybe even a small dock, something families can enjoy. Applause rose from the neighbors, murmurs of excitement. Children sitting in the back clapped their hands. The man standing at the door felt his blood run hot. They spoke about his lake as if it were theirs to decorate, theirs to build on. He stepped forward, slowly at first, unnoticed. But as he reached the back row of chairs, heads began to turn, whispers spread quickly. That's him, the fisherman. The one they called the cops on. The room grew restless. The president paused, his confident tone slipping for a second before he smiled stiffly. Sir, this is a private meeting for residents only. You are not welcome here. His voice was polite on the surface but sharp underneath, meant to cut. The man's jaw clenched. He walked down the aisle between the rows of chairs, ignoring the glares, until he reached the front, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and he laid the folder on the table with a loud slap. The sound echoed through the room. Silence fell, every eye fixed on him. You call this your lake, he said, his voice low but carrying strength. But these pictures prove otherwise. He opened the folder, sliding out the photos one by one, placing them in a neat row across the board's papers. Photos of the dirt path cut through the woods, of the trash left behind, of the tire tracks, of the broken sign nailed to his tree. Gasps filled the room. Neighbors leaned forward, craning their necks to see. The board members shifted uncomfortably. The president's smile faded into a hard line. This proves nothing, he snapped, his hand trembling as he pushed one of the photos aside. So some kids cut a path. That doesn't change ownership. The man's eyes narrowed. Ownership, he repeated. You dare speak of ownership when my family deed clearly shows the lake belongs to me. Not your subdivision. Not your board, me. And yet you've been trespassing, lying, calling the police on me while your residents sneak onto my land for years. The room erupted into whispers. Neighbors looking at each other. Confused, unsettled. The man saw doubt in their faces now, cracks forming in the board's control. He pressed on. This isn't about kids cutting a path. This is about your leaders claiming something that was never theirs. They built a fence with a gap. They nailed a sign to my tree. They let you believe this was your lake. And now they're planning benches and docks, all on land they do not own. His voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by anger and truth. The board president slammed his fist on the table. Enough, he shouted, his voice echoing. You have no right to interrupt. This is our community, our rules. If you don't like it, you can take it up with the county. But the man smiled bitterly, leaning closer across the table. I already plan to, he said. And when I do, your lies will crumble, your budget wasted, and every resident here will know you have been stealing from them just as much as from me. The silence that followed was heavy. Neighbors sat frozen, some shifting uncomfortably, others glaring at the board. The man gathered his photos back into the folder, his movements slow and deliberate. Then he turned to the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces. You deserve the truth, he said, his voice steady. And the truth is this lake has never been yours, it never will be. So the next time they tell you stories, ask to see the deeds, ask to see the proof, don't let their words be enough. With that he walked out, the room buzzing behind him, voices rising in confusion and anger. The board members shouting to regain control, but he knew their grip had slipped. Seeds of doubt were planted, and soon the truth would spread faster than their lies. Outside, the night air hit him like a wave, cool and sharp. He breathed deep, his heart pounding. But this time not with fear, with determination. The fight had just begun, and he was ready. The next morning the man drove into town, his truck rumbling down the old highway as the sun climbed over the horizon. His eyes were tired from the restless night, but his mind was sharp, focused. He knew exactly where he needed to go. The county records office, a quiet building that held the truth buried in dusty files and yellowed maps. He parked and stepped inside, the smell of old paper and ink hitting him as soon as he entered. Shelves stretched along the walls, filing cabinets lined up like soldiers, Behind the counter sat a clerk with glasses perched on the edge of his nose. The man walked up, his boots heavy on the tiled floor, and asked for land records connected to his lake. The clerk gave him a long look before sliding a form across the counter. "Fill this out," he said, his voice bored. The man scribbled down the information, his name, his address, his family's name, then pushed the paper back. The clerk disappeared into the back room. The minutes stretched long, every tick of the wall clock like a hammer in the man's ears. Finally the clerk returned carrying a thick folder bound with a string. "Been a while since anyone asked for these," he muttered as he set it down. The man untied the string and opened the folder, his breath catching as he saw the old documents. The first page was a deed, his grandfather's name written in faded ink, the property described in careful detail, every boundary line, every acre accounted for, and right there, clear as day, the lake marked within their ownership. His chest tightened with relief and anger. Relief that the truth was written here. Anger that the HOA had ignored it. Flipping through the folder he found survey maps drawn decades ago, showing the land long before the subdivision was built. The lake circled neatly, the woods surrounding it untouched, his family name beside it. Then he found the newer maps, the subdivision carved out like a scar across the land, houses stacked in neat rows, cul-de-sacs and driveways. But the boundary lines stopped short of the lake. They had no claim to it, not then, not now. His jaw clenched as he thought about the board. President's smug face, bragging about benches and docks, lying to neighbors about community property, all while these papers sat here proving them wrong. He pulled out his phone and began snapping photos of every document, every map, every signature. The click of the camera steady, proof that could not be denied. When he finished he tied the folder shut again and slid it back across the counter. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Everything you needed?" he asked. The man nodded, his voice low but steady. "More than enough." He walked out into the sunlight, the weight of the folder's truth now in his pocket as pictures. The air smelled sweeter, the sky brighter, but beneath it all his anger still simmered. He climbed back into his truck and drove past the subdivision on his way home. As he passed the lake entrance he slowed, staring at the wooden fence with its wide gap, at the dirt path leading onto his land. He pulled over and stepped out. The sound of children laughing reached his ears, and he saw them down by the water, fishing poles in hand, a family spread out on blankets near the shore. His shore. He stood there watching, unseen from the road, his heart twisting. It wasn't their fault. They didn't know. They thought this was their community lake, a lie sold to them by the HOA. But the sight only steeled his resolve. He would not blame the families, but he would expose the leaders who had misled them. He took another picture. The family's picnic under the oak tree. The fishing lines dipping into his water. Then he turned and walked back to his truck, his mind already racing with plans. He would call a meeting himself, not in their clubhouse but at the lake, in the open where everyone could see. He would show the photos, the deeds, the maps. He would put the truth in their faces and force the board to answer. He gripped the steering wheel tight as he drove away, the tires crunching on gravel, his determination burning hotter with each mile. They had trespassed for years, stolen his peace, humiliated him with flashing sirens and false accusations. But now he had the weapon they could not fight. The truth written in ink and sealed in county records. The lake was his, and soon everyone would know it, and when they did, the HOA's lies would come crashing down around them. The man spent the next 2 days preparing. Every free moment went into gathering his evidence, printing the deeds, enlarging the survey maps, and organizing the photos into neat stacks that no one could ignore. He called the police department and asked the same officers who had once stood on his shore to attend. He also sent letters to the HOA board demanding their presence at the lake that weekend. His words polite but sharp. He wanted them cornered, with no room for escape. By Saturday morning the air around the lake was buzzing with voices. Neighbors came in groups, curious and restless. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, pointing toward the water. Some carried lawn chairs, some stood with arms crossed, suspicious and defensive. The HOA board arrived together, stiff in their clean clothes, their eyes darting nervously at the crowd. And then the 2 police officers pulled up, parking near the dirt path, their expressions serious. The man waited at the dock, his folder resting on a small table beside him. When the crowd settled, he stepped forward, his voice calm but strong, carrying across the water. "Thank you for coming. I know many of you were told that this lake belongs to the community, that your HOA has the right to control it. But today I am going to show you the truth." He opened the folder and lifted the first page, holding it high so all could see. This is the original deed signed in my grandfather's name. This lake, every tree and every inch of land around it, belongs to my family. It always has. Long before this subdivision was built, a murmur rose from the crowd. People shifting, whispering. The board president scoffed loudly, stepping forward. Lies, these are lies. He is twisting old paperwork to confuse you. His voice cracked slightly, but he masked it with a glare. The man set the deed on the table and unfolded the survey map, spreading it wide so the crowd could see the clear lines. The borders stopping before the subdivision. The lake drawn neatly within his property. This map, he said firmly, was filed with the county. It shows the truth. The subdivision ends here. Not here, he jabbed a finger at the paper, pointing to the path where they had cut the fence. Not where you've been told. Not where you've been trespassing. And not where the board claimed. The lake is mine, and your leaders knew it. The police officers stepped closer, looking at the papers themselves. Their faces unreadable but their silence loud. The man then pulled out the photos, one by one, laying them on the table. Here is the path through the woods. Here are the trash and picnic remains left by trespassers. Here is the broken sign nailed to my tree calling this community property. This was not a mistake. It was deliberate, a lie to you, and an insult to me. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, voices rising. Some turned on the board members, demanding answers. Others stared at the man with wide eyes, realizing for the first time how badly they had been misled. The board president tried to shout over them, his face red. This man is twisting everything. He is trying to take away what belongs to us. We've maintained this lake for years, we've used it, but his words were drowned out by the anger of neighbors now turning against him. You lied to us, a woman yelled. You said the HOA owned it. You made us pay fees for it. Another shouted. The man watched silently, his heart pounding but his face calm. He could see the tide turning. The truth had finally broken through their walls. When the noise died down, he spoke again. Softer now, but every word sharp. I am not here to punish families. I know many of you didn't know, but I will not allow trespassing any longer. The lake is private property, my property, and anyone caught here without permission will face legal action. This is not anger, it is the law. The silence that followed was heavy. The board members shifted uneasily, their once smug faces pale. The police officers finally spoke, their voices firm. We've seen the documents. The lake does appear to belong to him. The HOA has no legal claim over it. If there are disputes, they belong in court, not in false police calls. The president's shoulders sagged, his confidence broken. Neighbors whispered angrily, turning their backs on him. The man closed the folder and lifted it into his arms, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. I told you the truth. Now you must decide who you trust, the ones who lied to you for years, or the one who stood here with proof. He turned and cast his fishing line into the water. The reel humming, the crowd behind him buzzing. With anger and betrayal, the HOA board shrinking under the weight of their own lies, and for the first time in weeks the man felt peace return. Not complete, not yet. But the first step had been taken. The lake was his again, and everyone knew it. In the days that followed the showdown at the lake, the entire subdivision buzzed with tension. Whispers spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors who once trusted the HOA now doubted every word. Families argued in driveways. Friends avoided each other. And the board members who had stood so tall began to shrink under the weight of anger around them. The man watched from his porch, the lake calm behind him, as groups gathered at the entrance of the subdivision, voices sharp and angry, demanding answers, demanding refunds for the so-called lake maintenance fees they had been paying for years. Some waved copies of the deed he had shared, others muttered about lawsuits. And when the board president tried to quiet them, he was met with shouts. That forced him back into the clubhouse. The man knew their empire was collapsing, brick by brick, built on lies too fragile to last. One evening as the sun set over the water, he heard footsteps on his dock and turned to see a small group of neighbors standing nervously. They looked embarrassed, shifting from foot to foot. One of them finally spoke. We didn't know, we believed them, we're sorry for how we treated you. Their words carried shame. And the man nodded slowly, his face calm. I know you didn't know, he said. My anger is not with you, but with those who led you into lies. This lake is mine, but I will not hold families at fault for the board's deception. Relief flickered in their eyes, though guilt remained, and they left quietly, spreading the story of his forgiveness as well as his warning. Within days, rumors swirled that some residents were gathering signatures to remove the board entirely. Petitions passed from house to house. Trust shattered beyond repair. The board members tried to fight back, sending out newsletters filled with excuses, claiming they had been misinformed, that the lake's ownership was unclear. But the man's evidence was too strong, his photos too clear, and the police statement too final. Their words fell flat. The once proud president now avoided public places. His car seen parked far away to escape confrontations, but anger still simmered, not only at the board but at the years of trespassing. The man often walked the lake's edge now, his eyes scanning the woods, and though most residents stayed away, a few still tried to sneak through the path at night, desperate to cling to what they thought was theirs. Each time he photographed them, each time he sent warnings, and each time the tension grew thicker, he knew it was only a matter of time before the board faced real consequences. One afternoon a letter arrived in his mailbox, stamped with the county seal. Inside it was confirmation of his property line, official and undeniable. With it came an invitation to testify at a hearing where the HOA would be questioned. He smiled grimly. The battle was shifting from whispers and crowds to the cold formality of law, exactly where he wanted it. In the meantime he stood on his dock, fishing rod in hand, casting his line into the calm water. The same spot where it had all begun, the place where peace had been broken. He could still hear the echo of sirens in his memory, still see the smug faces of the board members calling him a trespasser, and each time the memory rose his grip tightened. But then he looked at the lake, at the reflection of the sky on its surface, and he knew he had already won something greater than their defeat. He had reclaimed his dignity, his truth, his place. The HOA's future was crumbling, their lies exposed, and soon they would face lawsuits, fines, and the fury of neighbors who once believed them. But for the man, victory was not loud. It was quiet, the soft ripple of water, the gentle tug of a fish on the line, and the knowledge that no one would ever steal his lake again.